Welcome to the Nerd Circle Show. I'm Nathan. So we have a new episode of WandaVision, episode 5. So I'm going to break down Easter eggs, things that we've noticed, references in this video. We'll have a panel discussion later on. So let's get into it. So the first thing that we noticed was even before the start of the episode with the recap. They had the scene where Wanda is explaining where Geraldine went, and instead of saying she had to rush home, she said she didn't belong here.
She's gone. She didn't belong here.
Which wasn't in the original episode 3 or in episode 4. It's not uncommon for a television show to recut the previously on section to display something that didn't really happen in the previous episodes to make the retelling a little bit easier, but since this is a show where the protagonist is re-editing the show in real time, it was a little bit jarring and confusing to see that at the beginning. Next, we're thrust into the 80s in the cold open, where we see the next thing that we notice, which is the set of the new house, which is really reminiscent of the show Family Ties. Also, we see Vision dressed like the dad from that show, Stephen Keaton. Next, we get Vision saying that he was reading The Descent of Man by Charles Darwin to the baby, which seems like an odd choice, but I think it's a nod again from the writers of the show, similar to the reference to Shakespeare in episode 3. So Darwin's Descent of Man, published in 1871, applies his evolutionary theory to human evolution, and it details the theory of sexual selection, which is a form of biological adaptation distinct from, yet interconnected with, natural selection. So the book delves into evolutionary psychology and evolutionary ethics, but I think it was chosen here by the writers because of its discussion of the dominant role of women in mate choice, given our protagonist Wanda here is choosing this domestic situation for herself. Next, we get a quick, funny Britishism from Vision. He uses the phrase "get a leg over," which is a British euphemism for having sex. So the next thing we notice is that Wanda can't make the baby sleep.
Go to sleep. Why won't you do what I want?
Which is a very curious thing, since we're being led to believe by some that she can control this entire environment. If you recall from episode 3, she couldn't make the stork disappear either. The next interesting thing that we notice is that as soon as Wanda remarks to Vision that maybe they needed a little help, Agnes shows up as if on cue. Next, Agnes says that she was on her way from Jazzercise, which was a 80s fitness craze similar to CrossFit or Zumba today. So the first David Lynchian, Twilight Zone-ish part of this episode is when Vision goes off script and Agnes gets a little rattled and she asks whether or not they should take it again from the top. When she does this, she looks to Wanda for, I don't know, advice, direction, permission. It's really weird, and Vision notices this too. Once we get back on script, Agnes sprays what she says is lavender on the children, but they also grow exponentially shortly after this. And she mentions her husband Ralph again, who she mentions every single time we see her, but we've never met him yet. And Vision starts to suspect Wanda because the coincidences and weird occurrences are starting to pile up, and he finds it inexplicable that she didn't notice Agnes's weird behavior from earlier. After the babies appear to advance their age up to 5, we see Agnes drinking again. In almost every episode, we've seen Agnes with a drink nearby. Also, she says that kids, you can't control them, which is a very interesting choice of words given that we saw Wanda literally couldn't control the babies earlier. Then we get another period-specific title sequence with references to Family Ties with the painting and also Growing Pains with the photos of the different ages. After the title sequence, we cut to Monica in a hospital bed outside the Westview Anomaly. She said when she was inside the anomaly, she heard Wanda's voice in her head. She also said she felt enormous grief, obviously over her mother. Then Jimmy and Darcy come to visit Monica, and Darcy says that she's a big fan, obviously referring to Monica's role in the WandaVision show Inside the Anomaly. Next, we find out that Monica's scans are coming up blank, and there are anomalies in her blood work. Without getting into too much speculation, it should be noted that Monica Rambeau is a superhero in the Marvel Comics. After the scan comes back blank, the doctor says that she has to do another scan, but Monica refuses because she wants to get back to work. Jimmy says that she does that, which communicates a level of familiarity that we didn't really see in the previous episode. I'm going to assume that the writers don't want us to think Jimmy is crazy, so the only logical explanation is that the scenes between Monica and Jimmy in the previous episode were cut down by the editor for that episode. So then we cut to a briefing on Wanda, led by Hayward and Jimmy. Jimmy explains that Wanda's parents are Irina and Oleg Maximoff, but it should be known in the comics that the twins' father is Magneto, one of the most powerful mutants. It's a fact that the twins don't learn until later in life. We then hear that the Maximoff twins' MCU parents were killed in an air raid when they were 10. For audience members following the MCU, we first hear this information in Age of Ultron from Pietro. In that movie, we also learned that the bomb that killed their parents was manufactured by Tony Stark's company, Stark Industries. This is why the twins' initial relationship with the Avengers was antagonistic, something mentioned later in the briefing. Then Hayward interrupts and notes that the twins were subsequently radicalized and volunteered for Hydra. This is something that we also learned in Age of Ultron, but as Jimmy notes, this is an oversimplification of what happened. So it's clear by this statement and subsequent statements in the briefing that Hayward is invested in painting Wanda as a terrorist, perhaps overly suspiciously invested in painting her as a terrorist. Hey folks, I just wanted to pause to say if you're enjoying the conversation, if you're finding it useful, engaging, entertaining, any of the above, please like the video below. It really helps the channel grow and we would really appreciate it. All right. Back to it. After Hayward's interruption, Jimmy continues the briefing and notes that Wanda and Pietro gained their powers after Hydra experimented on them using the Mind Stone. This is something we learned in Avengers Age of Ultron as well. However, this is not the first time we saw the Mind Stone. The first time we saw it was in the original Avengers movie, wielded by Loki. Mind Stone was also the key component that brought Vision to life in Avengers Age of Ultron, and the absence of it is what caused his death in Avengers Infinity War. Hayward interrupts again with his paint Wanda as a terrorist agenda and notes that she doesn't have an alias, and also she was originally an antagonist to the Avengers. While it's true that Wanda doesn't have a superhero alias within the MCU, her superhero alias within the comics is the Scarlet Witch. To further bolster his argument, Hayward brings up the incidents that happened in Lagos in Germany in the movie Captain America: Civil War. In this movie, Wanda accidentally kills a delegation of Wakandan diplomats when she tries to redirect a bomb that would have otherwise killed Captain America and everyone in a market square when the villain Crossbones detonated it. This incident led to the Sokovia Accords, which were meant to restrict the activity of the Avengers and place them under international law. The Accords also caused schism within the Avengers. This disagreement ultimately led to a battle between the different factions of the Avengers at an airport in Germany. This is what Hayward was referring to when he mentioned Germany. So after all of Hayward's interruptions, we get another indication from the writers that we're not supposed to like Hayward, because Darcy and Jimmy don't like Hayward, and they're the very likable audience surrogates for the show. Speaking up for Wanda after Hayward's character assassination, Monica states that she wouldn't have survived being thrown from the anomaly if Wanda wasn't protecting her. Given Monica's weird scans earlier in the episode, it remains to be seen what was protecting her. So, in an effort to solidify his Wanda is a terrorist argument, Hayward said that he was authorized to disclose to everyone that Wanda broke into the SWORD facility 9 days ago to steal Vision's body and resurrect him in violation of his wishes and also the Sokovia Accords. This is just exposition and plot, but the curious thing that we noted is that he said that he was authorized to show this information. He's the director of SWORD. Who was he authorized by? So the other thing that we noticed from this Hayward disclosure was that Vision's body was in pieces when Wanda came to claim him. Last time we saw Vision, except for the hole that Thanos left when he pulled the Mind Stone out of his head, his body was mostly intact on the battlefield in Wakanda at the end of Infinity War. Since this is a Easter eggs, references, and things we notice video and not a speculation video, I won't speculate as to what's going on here. I will note in the previous episode, Monica was concerned when she heard that Hayward was creating weapons.
Shifted away from manned missions and refocused on robotics, nanotech, AI, sentient weapons, like it says on the door.
It also says observation and response on that door, not creation.
So the next thing of note is that Hayward said this happened 9 days ago, which means Wanda went to claim Vision's body about 2 weeks after the battle with Thanos in Endgame. So after all these expedition dump scenes outside the anomaly, we go back inside the anomaly with Vision and Wanda. The next thing that we notice is the headline on Vision's paper, Local Homemakers Innovating Recipes. This is in line with the bland and placid headlines of the papers in the previous episodes. The other thing of note is that Vision anticipates Agnes's visit because he's starting to recognize a pattern. The other thing of note and an Easter egg is that Agnes suggests calling the dog Sparky, which was the name of Vision's robotic dog in the comics when he moved to the suburbs with his robotic family. So Wanda brazenly flaunts her power in front of Agnes, and this concerns Vision because that's not what they agreed upon, and it also further makes him suspicious of Wanda. This scene ends with the twins aging themselves up again, this time to 10, so they can keep the dog. What's interesting to note is that Agnes is on hand to witness this weirdness, and she doesn't comment, just like she didn't at the beginning of the episode. In the next scene, we're outside the anomaly again, where Darcy and Monica are brainstorming ideas about how to safely re-enter the anomaly. What's interesting to note here is that Monica says that she knows an aerospace engineer that can help them build a vehicle that will let them enter the anomaly safely. I'm not going to speculate here about who she's talking about, but if you're interested in speculation, you should check out our theories video for episode 5. Next, we get an Easter egg and a comic book reference. Darcy calls the anomaly the Hex because of its shape. This is a reference to Wanda's powers in the comic books, which is called Hex Magic. What follows is a very comic booky conversation between Monica, Darcy, and Jimmy about who could have taken out Thanos by themselves, either Wanda or Captain Marvel. The first thing that's interesting to note here is that it seems at least these people who have top secret clearance know exactly what happened at the end of Endgame. The other interesting thing to note here about this exchange is that Monica swiftly changes the subject when the conversation shifts to the Captain Marvel, or as she knows her, Aunt Carol. This is something Jimmy and Darcy notice. The next thing that we notice is that they identified the mailman. There was a lot of speculation that he was the person under Jimmy's witness protection, but it doesn't appear to be the case. Also, it appears they haven't identified Agnes or Dottie as real people yet, which is of course curious. The last thing to note about this board is that a continuity error that showed up last week is also showing up here. Last week they identified Norm as Abhilash Tandon, and there's a blurb underneath of his ID which details what's going to happen in a scene later in this episode. It's difficult to see in this scene, but if you zoom in on the same page from last week, you can see that it says that Abhilash expresses concern for his father and his sister when Vision takes him out of his trance. This is exactly what happens later on in the episode. When the trio goes to examine Monica's uniform, what follows is what appears to be another continuity error. Darcy and Jimmy seem confused that Monica's clothes from inside the anomaly seem to be from the 70s. This doesn't make sense because they both rushed to her side when she was ejected from the anomaly at the end of the previous episode.
Monica! You okay?
So they presumably saw what she was wearing. We then transition back inside the anomaly where Vision is setting up computers and everyone in the office receives an email from Darcy on the outside. Presumably as inside the anomaly catches up with modern day, they can receive more information from the outside, but that's not what's curious about this scene. What's interesting is they all recite the email in unison as if they're connected in a hive mind. What follows is a scene that I detailed earlier between Vision and Norm, or Abhilash. What's curious about this is that Norm says that you have to stop her, she's in my head. But he doesn't mention Wanda by name. Based on Vision's conflict with Wanda later in this episode, it's obvious that he draws the conclusion that it's Wanda controlling everything. And we're led to believe this based on Monica's account earlier in the episode, but it's not clear based on this scene. We then cut to Wanda and the boys back at the house. Given what happens at the end of this episode, we notice something on rewatch that we missed the first time. Wanda says that her brother Pietro is far away and it makes her sad. She does not, however, tell them that Pietro died like she did with Geraldine / Monica in episode 3. There's a bunch of scenes where Monica tries to make contact with Wanda using a drone from the 80s, and Hayward tries to blow Wanda up. Notable about this isn't that Hayward betrayed Monica and didn't tell her that there was a missile on the drone. Given what we know about Hayward, this is hardly a surprising turn of events. What's interesting is that Hayward uses the term no joy when it's obvious that contact with Wanda isn't going to be successful. This is a military aviation term. So it appears Hayward was Air Force, just like Maria Rambeau and Carol Danvers. After an attempt to blow up Wanda fails, she exits the anomaly to warn them not to enter again. There are a couple interesting things about this encounter. First, it's obvious that Wanda knows Hayward because she refers to him as director. Second, Wanda's accent is back, indicating that she's definitely putting on a show inside the anomaly. The scene ends with Wanda saying that she has everything she needs and no one's going to take it from her again. And it also looks like she used her energy to put a barrier up around the anomaly. We then treated to another period-specific commercial with references to Wanda's life. This one obviously related to the tragedy in Lagos that I mentioned earlier in the video. This is a paper towel commercial with a very on-the-nose tagline, "When you make a mess you didn't mean to," obviously referring to Wanda's mess in Lagos. Oh, and as an aside, it's really annoying that throughout this episode they keep pronouncing Lagos wrong. They keep saying Lagos. After the commercial, we cut back to inside the anomaly and it appears that the twins have lost the dog. What's particularly interesting about this short search is when the boys are searching in the neighborhood, the mailman reassures the boys by telling them that their mom won't let the dog get too far. This seems to indicate that he understands Wanda's control over the environment, but that means that he has more cognition and control over himself than Norm did in the previous scene. Unfortunately, the dog is found dead, and what follows is a few things that are interesting about the exchange between Wanda and her boys. First, she tells them not to age themselves up to escape their feelings, which is curious because this entire environment seems to be Wanda's escape from her feelings. The other interesting thing about this exchange is that the boys think that Wanda can fix death. She assures them that she cannot, which is contrary to what we're being led to believe in other parts of this episode. Once Vision buries the dog, he confronts Wanda and tells her that he spoke to Norm, free of her oversight. Like the people on the outside, it's clear that Vision has come to believe that Wanda is controlling this entire environment. Vision accuses Wanda of constantly changing the subject and literally changing everything overnight, and he tells her that she can't control him like she controls everyone else. What we found particularly interesting about this small part of their argument is that, contrary to Wanda's denials later in the conversation, she obviously has some control over the environment because she rolls credits on Vision. The next part of the argument gets particularly heated. Vision yells at Wanda, Wanda yells at Vision. They use their superpowers to fly up into the air and face off against one another. While the spectacle of this is really compelling to watch and really good TV, what we found interesting is what Wanda says at the beginning and at the end of this conversation. At the beginning of this part of the conversation, Wanda says, "I don't know what you're talking about," which, if true, can only be half true because we just saw her roll credits on the conversation earlier. At the end of the conversation, exasperated, Wanda says, "I don't know how any of this started in the first place," which might be closer to the truth. After this, we get our last big surprise of the episode. In the middle of their conversation, the doorbell rings, and Vision, given all the coincidences that he's been observing, assumes that Wanda is manipulating the environment again. So this time it's not Agnes at the door, it's Pietro, seemingly back from the dead, but he looks and sounds a little different. First, this guy is doing an obvious impression of Uncle Jesse from the show Full House, which is appropriate since we're in the 80s, but it's also super weird because Elizabeth Olsen's sisters are Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen, and this show within a show is already super meta. But they compound the meta because this actor is Evan Peters, who played Quicksilver or Pietro in the X-Men movies. Before Disney bought 20th Century Fox, Fox produced several X-Men movies, and Evan Peters' Pietro was a character in 3 of those movies. I'm not going to speculate here about why Marvel chose an actor who played the same character but in a different set of movies for this part. But if you're interested in speculation, you should definitely check out our theories video where we're wildly speculate about this and pretty much everything else in this episode. So that's all we saw. Did we miss anything? Comment down below if we did. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.